The truth is that, you know, of course Israel has a right to defend itself. And I would say even stronger, it's not that Israel has a right to defend itself. Israel has an obligation to defend itself. As an Israeli civilian, the first thing I ask for my country is to defend me and protect my life and the life of my fellow citizens. But the question is how you do it. And sadly enough, looking at the methods and the ways we're doing what we're doing in Gaza is very questionable. You know, the fact that basically entire families inside houses are being blown up by the Air Force, that is unjustifiable. And I think the second thing I would say, it's very important for the state to defend itself, but using force is not the only way to defend itself. And we should try to think maybe there's other ways of trying to defending and protecting our society and country.
But your Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has referred to the Israeli Defense Forces, quoting, as the most moral fighting force in the world. Now, Yehuda, Shaul, do you know of any other military force in the world that is deliberately about not targeting civilians?
Sadly enough, I don't believe that we are doing everything we can not to target civilians. I think the kind of weapons we're using in Gaza are putting this statement very much in question. Take, for example, artillery. I know that people who are not in the military, it sounds maybe Chinese, but artillery is a statistical weapon that inflicts huge damage. Okay, one exploding shell of artillery is 42 kilograms that explodes and kills people in a radius of 50 meters, injures people in a radius of another 100, 150 meters. And it's a statistical weapon, it's not an accurate weapon. So using hundreds, if not thousands of shells of artillery in a place so densely populated like Gaza, you cannot say we're doing everything to avoid civilian casualties. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not that I'm saying that Israel is going out there in order to kill as many civilians as possible, no. But sadly enough, we are far away from these statements being given by our Prime Minister and other officials that we're doing everything to avoid civilian casualties. We're not.
But Yehuda,
and that's a problem.
But your Prime Minister is saying, and so a spokesperson for the IDF, that the Israeli armed forces or defense forces are actually warning civilians inside Gaza prior to any bombardment. Isn't that a sign of some sort of morality amidst all the horror?
But that's the thing, you know. This is a new technique, actually. It started a bit a few years ago in Gaza, and today it's an upfront policy, this knock on the roof thing, where basically you take houses of Hamas activists, which that, of course, must be in question, because this idea that every house of a Hamas activist is a legitimate target to bombardment is something that I find a bit difficult to believe. You know, it has nothing to do with the direct threats that it poses to our forces. It's a house of a Hamas activist, so it's a go. And then what we do is either call the family and ask them to leave or drop a small bomb on the roof. It's called the knock on the roof. And then wait 10, 20 minutes, give them to leave, and then we bomb the place out, you know, from the air. Now, this idea that because people didn't listen to our phone call, they get a death penalty and entire families are being wiped out this way, this is outrageous in my eyes, and this is not something I want to be done in my name. Of course, we alert them, but not listening to us in a situation where they don't pose direct threat to our troops, that is outrageous to say that, you know, you get a death penalty just for not listening to our phone calls.
But Yehuda, Shaul, how should the war then, given that it's a justifiable war in the sense that Israel is protecting its citizens and to some degree its borders, how should the war then be waged in your name? Look,
there is international law and there is clear rules of how and what you need to follow in the ground. The idea that because you called civilians to leave, everything is a go in a given area, especially in a dense populated area like Gaza, is unacceptable. And the other thing is that I would ask here is the story is not just to look at it from today. We need to ask ourselves about the context and what happened yesterday and the day before yesterday and 2 months ago and 5 months ago. Look at where we are. In the last few years, we had what in Gaza? We had Operation Summer Rains in 2005. We had Operation Warm Winter in 2008. Sorry, we had Operation Autumn Clouds in 2006. We had Kased in 2009. We had Pillar of Defense in 2012. And what these operations led us to where? To another operation, and every 2 or 3 years, that's what we're going to have. Maybe we should rethink a bit our strategies and find a better way to try to defend the country? The second thing I would put here, which is very, very important, put aside the moral issues, which I think are crucial and very important. Also, let's think of it strategically in a very cold manner. Do we really believe that harming civilians in Gaza is going to weaken Hamas? I don't believe that. It's going to strengthen Hamas. It's going to strengthen our enemies. And the way to basically move forward is to find a different way to solve this problem.
And that's inside Gaza, but how is the war, given that the death toll is rising, particularly on the Palestinian side, but also on the Israeli side, how do you think that the war is affecting Israeli society?
I must say that my feeling is that today in Israel we are in dark times. We are in really, really bad days. I don't remember days like this. We see people are just completely not willing to tolerate any question marks. It doesn't matter what you think, yeah? The way you behave counts and matters. And in an open and free society, as I wish we were, people would be allowed to speak their minds. But you basically see anti-war protesters around Israel being beaten up by just a bunch of vigilantes in the streets. We don't see law enforcement enforcing the law and allowing these protests to take place. We see ministers and parliament members inciting. Yeah, so this violence and this experience is coming from all the way up. This didn't start today, and not with the conflict in Gaza. It started the second after the 3 teenagers were kidnapped. The 3 Israeli teenagers were kidnapped in the West Bank. And then we saw the murder, the brutal murder of a Palestinian young man, Muhammad Abu Khdel, from East Jerusalem, being burnt alive. So I think as an Israeli Jew, I think these are definitely dark days in our history.
But Yehuda, Shaul, you know as well as anyone, or perhaps better than me and any Danish viewer, that if you actually end the occupation, and that's the argument proposed by your Prime Minister, for instance, it will not stop Hamas or any other jihadist movement from attacking Israel once more. That's the argument.
I'll tell you the truth. I don't believe that peace is going to come to the Middle East so easily. I just don't accept and I don't agree that a prolonged occupation over millions of people, stripping them from their rights and dignity, is an option on the table. But let me tell you another thing that is very, very important to put here. The only way I would allow you to bring security into the question of whether to prolong or not the occupation is if tomorrow my government will take 550,000 Israeli settlers in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, put them on trucks and bring them back to Jerusalem, back to Israel, then I will allow you to bring peace into the table. But as long as we're not doing that, so it's obvious that it's not about just our own survival. Tomorrow you can evacuate all the settlements, leave the military, we can have a discussion, just like we had with the occupation in South Lebanon, whether it's better to have troops or not, whether that is going to make Israel more safe or not. But as long as we're continuing with the settlements, we're basically proving and showing to ourselves and to the world, and most importantly to the Palestinians, that this is not what we're here. We don't want them to be free, and that's why we continue the settlements. But one last thing I would add about this is, let's look at it from the Palestinian perspective. Let's look at it from the Palestinian perspective. What do Palestinians see? There is negotiations and peace process for over 20 years, and what they've got, more than 3 times the amount of settlers in the West Bank and Gaza. Look at Hamas. They kidnap Gilad Shalit. They free over 1,000 prisoners. They use violence. Israel evacuates the settlements from Gaza. So what does the average Palestinian, what's the message he gets? That what works, negotiations and non-violence or violence? And I think this is a very, very bad thing. This is a bad message we're sending to the average Palestinian, our neighbors.
It's absolutely, I agree with that, Yehuda Shaul. But on the other hand, when you and you know that as a former combat soldier, when you have an enemy that actually refuses to recognize your existence, such as is the case with Hamas vis-a-vis Israel, wouldn't you say that it's only fair, seen from a political and perhaps strategical point of view, to actually engage wholly in fighting that enemy?
Again, you won't hear good words about Hamas from my mouth. Hamas is a terrorist organization doing whatever it can to harm, inflict as much damage in life, in infrastructure, inside Israel, civilians, military, it doesn't matter. Yeah, no good words about Hamas from my mouth. But again, the question is this moral the way we behave? And my answer is no. Question number 2, are we doing everything to end the occupation and reach a settlement? The answer, sadly, is no. And the third question is our behavior going to weaken Hamas or strengthening them? And sadly enough, I think it's going to strengthen them. That's what's so sad about it, because Hamas is so cynical that they build themselves on the damage to civilians in the Gaza Strip. And we're just playing in their hands with the strategies and methods that we're using.
Given all that you have said about the development inside Israel and the building up of what you see as a more aggressive policy towards the Palestinians, who are you? I mean, this is a bit philosophical perhaps, but who are you as a people, the Israelis?
I think what's happening to my society is what happened to me as a soldier in the occupied territories. Slowly, yeah, you get used to crossing moral red lines. Slowly, you become numb. And after 47 years of occupation, after so much years of conflict, we are just used to not seeing our neighbors as equal human beings to us, losing the ability to feel apathy to the suffering of the other side. And that is really, really sad for me as an Israeli, because the only way out is if both sides will have dignity. That's the only way we're going to be able to live in peace, and that's what we should aspire to. And the first step for that is to end the occupation completely.